Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a deeply focused look at a really fascinating piece of source material. It's a recent, widely circulated message from the Baha'is of the United States titled A Common Endeavor. And what makes this text so compelling is that it offers this highly unique spiritual framework for addressing the really severe societal challenges we're all facing today. Our objective over the next few minutes is to unpack this message, clear up its core arguments, look at its vision for the country, and explore the practical steps it outlines for everyday people.
Right off the bat, this quote perfectly captures the cultural zeitgeist, doesn't it? We're living in a time where exhaustion, division, and anxiety basically feel like the baseline of our public discourse. The source text actually identifies this exact feeling as a critical juncture for society. It acknowledges that the constant, loud narrative of conflict we hear every day obscures a very real, very widespread desire among everyday people to just transcend this division. It meets us right where we are.
Section 1. America's Promise and Crisis, the gap between ideals and reality.
Okay, let's dive into this. The text establishes a core tension that has literally defined the United States since its inception, this constant oscillation between its highest, most noble aspirations and its actual on-the-ground struggles. On one side, we have the founding ideals of the nation: freedom, equality, and justice. These represent the visionary destiny of the country. But then, on the other side, we have the current social maladies blighting society, which the text explicitly identifies as excessive materialism, corruption, racism, and the exploitation of vulnerable groups. What's absolutely crucial to understand about this source is its perspective on these problems. It argues that shedding these ills isn't just some political or economic challenge, it is fundamentally a moral and spiritual task.
And that leads to one of the text's biggest assertions. Freedom, equality, and justice aren't just legal terms or political buzzwords. They are, at their very core, moral or spiritual principles. The authors assert that we can only flourish collectively if we actively embody these principles, alongside values like moral courage, integrity, trustworthiness, and love in our daily lives. They're part of humanity's shared spiritual heritage, and they desperately need fresh expression today.
Section 2. The Principle of Oneness. Out of many, one.
So, the crucial point of their proposed solution centers on one specific concept, the principle of oneness. This is captured perfectly by the national motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. The message argues that the heart of true prosperity and the actual reflection of our founding principles lies right here. It's the recognition that all people belong to a single human family. But pay close attention to the second half of this definition because it's a real game changer. It's about embracing diverse expressions of our common humanity, not demanding uniformity. According to this framework, prejudices of any kind are actually a distortion of the human spirit. They aren't our essential nature. So overcoming prejudice is framed as an absolute necessity for social survival.
Now, historically speaking, the country is obviously full of great material enterprise, right? Massive innovations in technology, industry, commerce. But the text points out a pretty stark reality. These material achievements have fundamentally changed how we live, yet they haven't actually yielded shared prosperity. It argues that material attainments, without a solid moral grounding, can cause just as much harm as good. So the challenge laid out here is that all our incredible innovation and creativity must now pivot to focus heavily on the spiritual dimensions of change, things like securing human dignity and finding collective meaning.
Section 3. Action at the grassroots. Community building across the nation.
So how does this actually happen at the micro level? Well, the source material points to thousands of community-building efforts currently underway across the country, driven by a real desire for unity. And this brilliantly illustrates what it looks like on the ground. We see tangible examples, like youth initiatives in Flint, Michigan helping out hundreds of families, teens engaging in a summer of service up in Boston, children's classes building bonds of unity down in Dallas. These aren't just isolated, one-off events. The text presents them as concrete evidence that grounds those lofty spiritual concepts we just talked about into everyday reality.
Now you might be wondering, okay, but how do I fit into this? The text actually breaks down very practical steps for anyone to act within their own sphere of influence, regardless of your background, age, or gender. We're encouraged to expand our circle of concern, to actively seek to harmonize our own interests with the interests of others, and to work for mutual benefit. Importantly, it heavily emphasizes empowering young people. When youth are inspired by a strong sense of purpose, they have this remarkable capacity to forge meaningful relationships and basically become the engine for this kind of social change.
Section 4. The Power of Conversation, a Vital Form of Action.
To fuel all this change, the text introduces something easily underestimated but absolutely vital:
Let's just slow down for a second and really sit with this powerful quote from the Baha'i writings. The power to transform the world is affected by love, disseminated by enkindled souls through intimate conversations that create new susceptibilities in human hearts. Meaningful conversation is framed here as a highly potent form of action. And let's be honest, in today's world, just walking across the street to have an intimate, hopes and dreams kind of conversation with a neighbor can feel incredibly daunting. But the text argues that this simple act can actually loosen the hold of biased norms and rigid social systems.
Now, what's really interesting about this grassroots approach is the humility it requires. The message explicitly states that these grassroots contributors out there bridging divides, they do not have all the answers. Instead, they're learning their way forward by asking profound, crucial questions. Let's look at 3 of the key questions the text poses for us to consider. First, how do we foster faith in the capacity of all so that everyone's contributions are sincerely welcomed and encouraged? I want you to think about how inclusion practically functions in your own community right now. Does your environment genuinely welcome the contributions of every single person?
Here's the second question. How do we build genuine bonds of concern, mutual responsibility, and collaboration to transcend differences? This directly challenges us on how we actually move past the exhaustion and polarization we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer. It's going to require active, intentional collaboration.
And the third question presented in the text, how can a shared devotional spirit help us experience all humanity and all life as an interdependent whole? Notice how sweeping this is. It completely reframes our moral obligations, not just to each other as humans, but extending outward to our stewardship of the land's resources. It's a fully holistic view of interdependence.
Section 5. A Hopeful Vision. The Promise of America.
As the source text concludes, it pivots away from those immediate challenges and offers a profoundly uplifting perspective, bringing the narrative arc all the way back to the ultimate destiny of the nation. The vision laid out here is that the United States is essentially a microcosm of the world. The text suggests that our differences, while often conceived as a source of tension, are actually a potent source of creativity and resilience. Harnessing our unity and diversity isn't just about solving domestic tension. The authors propose that finding new ways of living together here can actually help establish peace and prosperity across the entire globe. That, it states, is the true promise of America.
Let's move to the next step and see how this builds into the text's final call to action. The authors urge readers not to falter during this trying time, viewing it instead as an inflection point. The steps they lay out are clear. See through our differences, join together in a common endeavor, draw on the incredible power of love and justice, and ultimately bring about a spiritual renewal that realizes our highest aspirations.
And that brings us to the final thought I want to leave you with, straight from the spirit of the source material. We are at a critical inflection point. The tools for grassroots community building, meaningful conversation, and spiritual renewal have all been outlined. So, the question now is, how will you contribute to our common endeavor? Take some time to reflect on this, look into the initiatives in your own neighborhood, and consider how you might expand your circle of concern. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.